All right, hello everyone. Happy Friday. Just so you know, I really have enjoyed reading your responses to the survey I sent out yesterday. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to fill that out. It's really helpful for me to know how you're doing and how I can best help you as your teacher. So thank you for those of you who did fill it out, and especially those of you who left encouraging comments. Those were really nice to hear for me during this time as well. I also, before we get started today, I want to give a brief trigger warning of sorts. In case you haven't figured it out already, this book does talk about rape. It doesn't go into a ton of detail because it's told from the perspective of a child, but if that is something that hits close to home or if you feel uncomfortable about it, that's okay. I just want you to know that it's coming and you can feel free to email me at any time if you have questions or concerns about that. All right, so today we are going to go over chapters 12 through 14, basically everything you read this week. And I'm going to highlight some of the major things you should take note of. So we kicked off our week in chapter 12 reading about Calpurnia taking Jem and Scout to her church, and I want to highlight a few aspects of that. So first, some of the people in the congregation, mostly Lula, says that she does not want Jem and Scout at her church. And this might seem super weird to us, but let's actually look at what's going on. So for some people, such as Lula, having a church space where Black people didn't need to worry about the eyes of the white people being on them and judging them, that was an important thing. However, you also see other members of the congregation jumping at the opportunity to show Jem and Scout that they are really not all that different, even if they go to different churches. You even have Calpurnia arguing that it's the same God, ain't it? As a reason for why it doesn't matter one bit where people worship or whether they're Black or white, because God is God and that's that. So you can worship perfectly well no matter what the color of your skin is. And this is an important thing that Harper Lee wants to emphasize in her novel. Another important thing that happens in that church service is that we start learning a little bit more about Tom Robinson. So we learn that Mr. Ewell, interestingly not Mayella herself, has accused Tom Robinson of raping his daughter, Mayella Ewell. And Scout has to ask Atticus about this later on in chapter 14, but for now, we learn that Tom Robinson has a really good reputation in his community. He has a wife and kids that he cares about, and he regularly goes to church. This should stand in very sharp contrast to the Ewell family, where the kids don't go to school except for the first day, let alone church. And their father is a known abuser and drunkard. And Bob Ewell is not respected in his community, and pretty much every single person in Maycomb agrees that he is a terrible person. The only thing that he does have going for him is that he's white. And we will see a lot more of that specific tension between Black and white in the trial in the upcoming chapters. So the last thing in this chapter that we learn is that Calpurnia is super smart and educated, but she doesn't always feel the need to parade her education around. So when she's at church, the kids notice that she doesn't talk as fancily as she does in the Finch house. And Calpurnia responds to that saying, "Now, what if I talked white folks talk at my church and with my neighbors? They'd think I was putting on airs to beat Moses." She doesn't care one bit if people know how cool or smart she is. And this leads us into talking about someone who feels very differently about what people think of them, and that is Aunt Alexandra. So Aunt Alexandra, she decides that she is going to move into the Finch's home to be a feminine influence, particularly for Scout, which, as a side note, Scout really wants to point out that Calpurnia is a woman and has been a very good feminine influence thus far, but in Aunt Alexandra's mind, Calpurnia doesn't really count as a positive influence because, frankly, Calpurnia is Black, and Aunt Alexandra would be totally fine getting rid of her altogether. Aunt Alexandra fits very well into the society in Maycomb, but Scout notes that she doesn't really fit well into hers and Jem's life, which also tells us that Jem and Scout and Atticus are slightly different than your stereotypical resident in Maycomb County. Aunt Alexandra's big obsession is heredity, which is basically knowing the stock you come from, knowing your heritage, and then having that inform how you act as a person or how you understand your own self-worth. And it sounds kind of weird to us, perhaps, but basically, she believes that Finches are upper class sort of people because they come from good breeding. Therefore, in Aunt Alexandra's mind, Jem and Scout ought to behave more like a gentleman and young lady and be more careful about who they talk to, how they dress, and how they talk, and things like that. Scout thinks this is super weird, and she responds to this by thinking, I never understood her preoccupation with heredity. Somewhere I had received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with the sense they had. But Aunt Alexandra was of the opinion, obliquely expressed, that the longer a family had been squatting on one patch of land, the finer it was. And Jem's perspective on this is he sort of takes that idea one step farther and he says that that makes the Yules fine folks then, which of course is simply not true. And so we see Jem and Scout, these kids, looking at Aunt Alexandra's very strong beliefs on heredity and finding fault with it, and recognizing it as sort of an excuse for prejudice against certain families who don't go as far back in the history of Maycomb. Similar to Calpurnia's attitude towards her friends not caring about how smart she is, Atticus also doesn't really care about the town being in awe of how cool the Finch family is just because they've been there for a long time. And that's why at the end of chapter 13, he tells Jem and Scout to just forget what Aunt Alexandra has been trying to teach them about heredity. Atticus sees Alexander's attitude as something that's unnatural to kids, and also at the end of the day, just an excuse to treat people less well than yourself because of where they come from. At the end of chapter 13, Atticus tries to make Aunt Alexandra happy by passing on her message about good breeding to Jem and Scout. But ultimately, he tells them to just forget it because he doesn't think that who you are as sort of like your family line, he doesn't think that your family line makes you any better or worse of a person than your actual actions and values. I want you to turn to page 26 of your packet. I'm going to tell you a few themes to look out for, and then you are going to be responsible for finding examples and evidence to support those themes. So on page 26, you have 4 blanks, and I'm going to give you 4 themes to look out for. First of all, last week we talked about innocence versus racism. Basically, this is don't be a racist, and especially don't let your racist prejudice cloud your understanding of someone else's innocence. So look out for that one. We also have a number of events that point us to our second theme. It might be a bit cliche, but it's still super important to look out for, and that's don't judge a book by its cover. Basically, don't judge someone on their outward appearance. Remember that quote that I brought up like 3 times last week, 3 or 4? Atticus says, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. This is a super famous quote, and if you're into memorizing things, this is a great one to remember because you see it in a lot of other places as well, people quoting this line. So we have a lot of characters in To Kill a Mockingbird that are super easy to judge quickly. We have Tom Robinson, Boo Radley, and next week you'll meet Mayella Ewell. So keep an eye out for how there might be a lot more going on in their situations than most people in the town think. Number 3, do what you believe is right, even when it's hard. You might also call this moral perseverance. We've talked a lot about perseverance. So we already saw some foreshadowing of this in the scene with Tim Johnson, the mad dog. Atticus does something difficult because it's the right thing. He perseveres through that inner conflict to do something he knows is important. So keep an eye out for how Atticus and other characters continue to do this throughout the rest of the novel, or sometimes check out how they fail to stand up for what they believe is right. All right, our last theme, I think it's easiest to understand in another binary opposition. We have integrity versus hypocrisy. So for some of you, these words are not super familiar. So let's break this down a little bit. Integrity can be defined as the state of being whole and undivided, or the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles or moral uprightness. Basically, the idea with integrity is that you don't compromise your beliefs. Your actions are a direct reflection of your beliefs and values. For example, so if I was to say that I really value the safety of others while driving, and then I do my best to follow all of the traffic laws so everyone on the road stays safe, that would be acting with integrity. My actions are reflecting that belief. And I might mess up now and then, but I recognize it and I do my best to get better because my value is in keeping everyone safe, and traffic laws are a way that I can express that principle. Hypocrisy is the opposite of that. So it's claiming to have a certain moral standard or belief, but behaving in a contradictory manner. It says, I value one thing, but my actions are not in line with that. For example, if I say I hate racism, but then I'm rude to any person of color I come in contact with, that's hypocrisy. So these are your 4 themes for page 26 of your packet. It's your responsibility to fill out examples for each of those. If you get confused at any point, try rewinding the video and rewatching part of it. There are so many important things going on in this book. As I reread it with you, I have so many ideas of things I want to highlight and talk about. And it's so hard not being able to see you every day so we can have so many different discussions. But this will have to do for now. As I'm going through your survey responses, I see that a lot of you would be interested in seeing me and Mr. Cho talk about the book. So maybe we'll pull that out next week sometimes to go over some more things and add a little bit of variety. Although apparently y'all weren't too interested in just having my face talk at you, which I guess that's fine. I'm not salty, probably. As always, email me if you have questions, and make sure you fill out the few questions I have after this video. I missed you all very much. Hang in there.